Live stream audio check. Good morning, the time's now 9:15. I shall resume this inquiry into an appeal made by Charles Church, Severn Valley, under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, against the decision of North Somerset Council to refuse outline planning permission for a residential development of up to 125 dwellings, class C3, with access off Dark Lane, 23 Dark Lane and land adjoining, Backwell, Somerset, BS 48 3NT. For anyone new today, my name is Benjamin Webb. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry, which is the second day of the inquiry. Firstly, the usual reminders to switch your electronic devices to silent, and in the case of a fire, the fire exit is to my left. The day will be split into a number of sessions. In terms of the timetable, you'll be aware that we'll be carrying forward some sessions from yesterday. So, yesterday we heard opening statements from the main parties, heard from interested parties, and heard evidence in relation to highways. Today's topics will be ecology, landscape, heritage design and planning. We'll have a roundtable session on planning obligations and conditions. There's a lot to fit in because I'm hoping to do the site visit at the end of the day. Are there any procedural or housekeeping matters before we start?
Not from our point of view, sir, and I have to say, rest assured we will finish in plenty of time today. It'll be much, much quicker. Okay then, so we're going to begin with ecology. We'll hear from Tom Clarkson, the appellant's witness on that topic. So could I ask you if you'd like to start your examination in chief? Thank you very much, sir. We're only going to be 10 minutes, so that's okay. And I'll just introduce the witness. Your name is Tom Clarkson, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
You're the owner and managing director of Clarkson and Woods, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
That's a specialist ecological consultancy, and you employ 25 ecologists, and you're based in premises in Somerset, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Good, thank you very much. You're a full member of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, is that right?
That is correct.
Have been for 20 years, with 20 years experience, and you have a degree in biology and a master's degree in environmental technology and wildlife management, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you're a full member of the CIEEM.
Yes.
Thank you. Good, okay. As far as the position with Natural England is concerned, you produced a shadow habitats regulations assessment, which is dated in February 2025, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. And so you've got that document, I presume? Yeah, thank you very much. It's obviously a substantial document. We've had a reply on the 12th of March from Natural England. Can I just distribute that, sir? And just in summary, tell us where that gets us to with the HRA issue, the Habitat Regulation Assessment issue.
Natural England's position is that they agree with the conclusions drawn within the HRA and the proposed list of conditions that we set out within the HRA to control the development. They've made one request to amend one of the conditions to include a requirement for some protection to the area around the balancing pond or sustainable drainage system.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. That deals with that. Just in terms of the bats, there's the North Somerset and Mendip Bats SAC, Special Area of Conservation. And as I understand it, the site lies in Band B for that consultation zone, is that right?
It's Band B for greater horseshoe bats, and it's also in Band C for lesser horseshoe bats.
Okay. Its surveys and assessments have been completed in accordance with the LPA and Natural England's published guidance, is that right?
That's correct, in accordance with the supplementary planning document that's published by North Somerset.
And they confirmed foraging for both greater and lesser horseshoe bats, is that right?
in effect, the surveys that we've done have confirmed the site is as important as it can be within the guidelines.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's a North Somerset Bats SPD.
Yeah, that was the SPD I was just referring to.
Yeah, and that's provides the framework for the assessment. So the council are fully alive to this issue, have produced the SPD, and invite developers to follow that SPD.
The objective of the SPD is to sort of standardise and normalise the approach to assessment and undertaken across all planning applications in North Somerset. The idea being that all habitats within a site have a value or importance for greater horseshoe bats and lesser horseshoe bats, and that value can be quantified. That quantification allows a sort of an empirical calculation as to the quality of the habitat for bats, and it also allows an empirical calculation for the quality of the habitat after the development has been completed and the landscaping has been implemented. And our development has therefore followed this empirical process and has demonstrated that we are compliant with the requirements of the SPD.
Okay, all right. So on site, just in a nutshell, what's the finding, and what's the nature of the site, if you like?
The findings are we have small but regular numbers of horseshoe bats of both lesser and greater, more lesser horseshoes than greater horseshoes, but both species. And the timings and structure of the calls suggest that it is used by foraging bats. Again, probably not a substantial number, based upon the average of sort of 10 passes per night for horseshoe bats, greater horseshoe bats, but that is considered important, and when that importance is demonstrated, you elevate the quality of the score, the band score that you give it. Ordinarily a band B score would be 2, but when you find foraging bats, you elevate that to 2.5 in a calculation, and that's as much as it could, the highest it could possibly be.
Okay, and then how does the development sort of relate to that? Having established that from the surveys, what, if anything, needs to be done?
We need to provide replacement bat habitat for the loss of the overall score of the site. Okay. What you find is that the habitats on site, in particular the fact that the site is largely an arable field, which has very little ecological importance for horseshoe bats, that scores quite poorly, and therefore by incorporating grassland habitats, which are known to be valuable, but they provide foraging opportunities for horseshoe bats, we can increase the ecological importance of the retained habitats, and therefore, despite the shrinking in the area of open space, we can provide an equivalent foraging resource for bats within a smaller area.
Okay, great. In terms of other protected species, what have you discovered there?
We have done reptile surveys where we've confirmed a small population of slowworms, and we know that there are several badger sets within the site, a substantial main badger set which is located in the red line but well beyond, at least 100 metres away from the construction site, and a smaller sort of low status outlying badger set which is proposed to be closed under the ecological methodology temporarily whilst the construction is built, just to ensure that there is no unintended sort of harm to badgers caused as a result of the development. Yeah,
I mean these the species have different status, don't they? So badgers are not protected in the same way as bats, is that right?
They are considered of different importance, for sure. I mean, badgers are a relatively widespread species. They receive quite a high level of protection in the law, but principally against persecution rather than as a consequence of their ecological importance. Bats, by contrast, are rare. The majority of species are very rare, and so they receive an elevated importance. Okay. And then biodiversity net gain, please. What is the gain on this site? Again, where we look at biodiversity and gain, we calculate the value of the habitats that exist on site. Now, it being an arable field, again, it scores very low because an arable field is by its very nature a low-scoring biodiversity habitat. And as a consequence, when we look at the losses of biodiversity on the site, they're relatively small. And again, in the same principle as we have for greater horseshoe and lesser horseshoe bats, we can incorporate a smaller area of much higher quality, more biodiverse habitat within the sort of landscaping parts of the site. And therefore, the calculations that we have shown have demonstrated that there is a 27% gain in habitats for the site and an over 100% gain in linear habitats or hedgerow units for the site.
As I understand it, there's an overlap between the biodiversity net gain and the habitats provided for the horseshoe bats, but importantly, 17.8% of the stated biodiversity gain is derived from habitats not accessible to bats and therefore not part of the SAC. So,
yeah, there is a requirement within the BNG calculations to ensure that mitigation provided for horseshoe bats and any SAC makes up no less, takes you only to a position of no net loss and not beyond. And so at least 10% of your gain has to come from habitats that are not otherwise included within your calculations for your SAC, your bat mitigation.
yeah,
We've calculated that actually the total is 17.8%, so it's substantially more.
yeah, so it's just unclear, that 17.8% is separate from the habitat for the horseshoe bat mitigation. Is that
Yeah,
right?
well, the way we do that calculation is by looking at all illuminated areas effectively. Illuminated areas would be completely inaccessible to bats in as far as the methodology goes, and therefore we can look at all illuminated habitats and therefore take a calculation that assesses what the area of that illuminated habitats are and what the ecological importance of the habitats being created are, and then that tells us that we have 17.8% of habitat on site is inaccessible to bats and therefore not part of the SAC mitigation.
Okay, and then the artificial lighting is a sensitive issue as far as bats are concerned, and so an appropriate lighting strategy has been prepared. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That was one of the requests of Natural England in preparing the Shadow HRA. They asked for us to model the lighting on the site, which we have done, which has demonstrated to Natural England's satisfaction that the key habitats on site can be adequately protected by a sensitive lighting strategy.
Okay, and then there's monitoring as well. Is that right? That's proposed.
Yeah, that's an important and essential part of any ecological strategy, is trying to understand what the consequence or outcome of the design has been, and monitoring is proposed for horseshoe bats through and greater horseshoe and lesser horseshoe bats through the HRA. But in addition, there would be monitoring associated with the biodiversity net gain habitats that are being provided on site. And so there is a sort of a fairly comprehensive monitoring program that will need to extend over a minimum of a 30-year lifespan, which will be the period for the BNG habitats to become established.
So 30-year monitoring.
Yeah, for the first 5 years we're looking at horseshoe bats, but monitoring for biodiversity net gain would extend over the lifespan of 30 years for the habitats on site.
Yeah, okay. Good. Those are all my questions, other than just to ask you about the gentleman who spoke yesterday, Graham Dixie. And Mr. Dixie is a resident of the village. He had a degree in botany and a second degree in horticulture. And he worked in the farming and agriculture sector, principally international agriculture. And he said he was concerned the ecological reports present a selective narrative, and there appears to be a disconnect between what's written and what is being done by the developer. Now, nothing's been done by the developer on this site.
No.
I don't know quite what he was referring to, but just any observations on that?
I mean, we're quite careful to make sure that we are presenting an honest and upfront appraisal of what's happening on site, what the impacts are, and work very, very closely with our clients to ensure that any ecological design strategy is really coherent. And that's what we've done on this site.
He says that your company and you in particular appear to have minimised the importance of the site for greater and lesser horseshoe bats. You reference only a limited number of bats observed flying over the site, 2023 and 2024, but you don't mention your own survey results showing considerable bat activity on the adjoining fields, particularly along the hedgerow on the southern edge of Farley Fields East. So any observations on that?
There's a couple of points there. Firstly, the suggestion that we've undervalued the site for horseshoe bats. I think the phrase in the shadow HRA at 6.143 says, considering the relatively small number of passes per night and the confirmation of foraging behaviour by those bats visiting the site, the data suggests that the site is used by a relatively small number of bats on an occasional basis. Nevertheless, the site remains an important resource for the greater and lesser horseshoe bat populations. We consider the site to be important, and we assess that as being the standard. If something is either important or it is not important, and we can't be more important or less important within ecological terms. In terms of the habitat and the adjoining fields, I think we demonstrated through the surveys on this site that the boundary to those adjoining fields was the most valuable habitat. We don't typically survey for habitats beyond our red line boundary, but the fact that the adjacent development and the surveys that inform that happen to find the similar feature would suggest that that local green space is one of the key habitats for horseshoe bats.
Yeah, okay. And he says that there's a maternity roost at Brockley Stables. Is that right?
That is correct. It's a maternity roost of long standing. I personally did the back counts of that maternity roost back in 2002.
Okay. And where is that? Where is
Brockley Stables is the centre of the local SAC population. It's a maternity roost. It's approximately, I can't say exactly how far away it is, but it's about 6 kilometres, I believe.
Okay.
It's Brockley Coombe.
Good. And then he says you've failed to mention that despite Persimmon's commitment to maintaining cattle on the local green space, whose dung is essential for the feedstock, Persimmon have terminated that long-standing grazier tenancy. Is he talking about the appeal site?
No, he's talking about the adjacent project, and that in the reports that we produced in March 24, we failed to mention that the grazing would be finished in the summer of 24, which would be an impossibility. In terms of the commitments to grazing, there isn't a desire to grazing. Natural England said that requested that best efforts are made to secure grazing on the site. Now, at the moment, I understand grazing is not currently taking place, but that doesn't preclude grazing from taking place in the future. And indeed, Siminar will and intend to be looking for graziers to aid with the support. Or indeed, if the land is handed back to the local community as part of the transfer of the local green space, then it would be the responsibility or the objective of the local, the new managers of that site to deliver that grazing.
Yeah, okay. And then it says, Persimmon have chosen to generate the necessary BNG units on site. A study of governance gaps in BNG pinpointed a number of failings of BNG. So sort of raising questions about the veracity of it. You talked about the monitoring for 30 years, is that right?
We did talk about the monitoring 30 years. Now, on the point of on-site versus off-site BNG, the biodiversity net gain hierarchy is very, very clear. It's set out and enshrined in the Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedure Order. Yeah. It states that we need to follow a sequential process, that being avoiding the effects of development, and insofar as they can't be avoided, we then mitigate for them in the following order: habitat enhancements on site. Where there can't be enhancements on site, then creation on site. Where creation can't be held on site, then we look to registered off-site gain, and we purchase credits as a last resort. Now, Mr. Dixie seems to suggest that we should sidestep those first two steps, and I would strongly disagree that that's appropriate. Actually, we need to be doing exactly what we can to, as best possible, protect what's there on site, rather than looking and shipping all of our biodiversity to somewhere else. We need to try and work and develop schemes and projects which balance and live in designed with nature in amongst them.
Yeah, and as I understand it, he has an interest in biodiversity net credits. Is that right?
I believe he's been advising and looking at how biodiversity net gain can be monetized in off-site locations. He has provided, and I believe he's an architect of a sort of a rewilding project down in Devon or Dorset, perhaps Wick Farm, I believe it is, and that he clearly, and I think rightly so, I would undoubtedly agree with him that there is a place for off-site habitat creation, and I think it does provide an excellent framework. But I think on sites such as this, where the actual biodiversity is quite small, there isn't very much because it's an arable field.
Yeah.
You wouldn't really expect, it would be a failure of ecological design to ship that off-site. Actually, you should be doing what you can to provide some valuable biodiverse habitats within your development.
Good. And then finally, the badgers. He says it's a few metres from a thriving, large, very long-standing badger set. You've looked at the badger sets, that's right?
We have indeed. There is a main set on site and there is an outlying set on site. The main set is actually within the area of land which is allocated for replacement bat habitat for the adjacent project.
Yeah.
It's within our red line, but not actually subject to any impacts whatsoever. The nearest point to development from that main set is approximately 100 metres, which would be ample buffer zone.
And the position is, isn't it? I mean, sometimes when developers and Persimmon and their predecessor Westbury purchased the site a long time ago and might have hoped to develop the whole thing, and that would obviously give rise to a difficulty for the badgers. But actually, a very large area is going to remain undeveloped because of the local green space designation. So, is it right that there is a substantial area that remains, even when both developments, if we get permission for this one, both developments are allowed? Is there a significant area for the badgers?
There's quite substantial green space. I wouldn't be considered in this instance particularly concerned by the loss of foraging habitat, which is what you are sometimes concerned with very large developments, but this wouldn't necessarily fall into that boat in terms of there's plenty of green space around this site, both.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, sir.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
The inspector had a number of questions as well.
Yes, which I've just been reminded of, forgive me. Do you want to just ask them, sir, your questions? Would you be happy to do that?
Yeah, I was just going to check that you had seen those in advance and were prepared to answer them.
Yeah, I have seen them.
Okay, then the first one was, and it was a point that was raised by Natural England in earlier correspondence, and it was why the ecology zone in relation to the development to the northeast had been included within the site.
I believe the intention of Persimmon at first was to incorporate this area as part of the public open space, but that through consultation with us, it was decided that that was not really appropriate. We hadn't allowed for the use of this area recreationally as part of the public open space provision. It was left within the red line. It's part of the same field, and so it feels appropriate to make sure that the whole field is covered within that red line boundary, but that it is made very clear throughout the ecological reports that whilst within the red line there is no actual work happening within that which isn't already committed to by the adjacent development, 21p 1766.
So just to clarify, if this appeal was to be allowed, would there be anything to prevent the proper implementation of any mitigation in relation to that other scheme?
No, absolutely not. Indeed, we will near a point where that habitat creation will need to start and to take place, because there's a commitment within the Section 106 to engage with the habitat creation upon 25% of the houses being ready for occupation, and whilst we're some way off that at the moment, we will get there, and therefore at that point that triggers the requirement to start creating that open space. There's no intention to use this land within, or there's no requirement to use it as part of the construction or development of the current application.
So can I just clarify the? There was a point raised in the shadow habitats regulations assessment. Let me just find the relevant. So it's in section 9. You talk about the construction phase. When you talk about phasing, so what is the envisaged phasing of the implementation of these required measures?
The majority of the habitats required for bats are to be on the periphery of development, and so they're, by their very nature, not going to be built upon. But the creating grassland on the edge of a building site is unlikely to be effective until that building site is largely completed. So the intention is to protect what we consider to be the key features for bats on site, which are the boundary features, the hedgerows which run around the periphery of the site. And then upon completion of construction, the remainder of those habitats identified within the shadow HRA would be created. We had acknowledged that there is likely to be a short-term adverse effect on horseshoe bats, say on this particular site, whilst the construction takes place, and Natural England are in agreement that that is an acceptable short-term effect.
I mean, they don't say as such, but I based on their response, you believe that they have considered that point?
I think Natural England are very thorough in the way they approach their assessments, and they are well aware of this construction phasing. It's something that's very clearly highlighted in the section on residual impacts on bats in the shadow HRA, and it's not been raised as an issue. As I say, by the time this scheme is likely to be starting to be built, it seems highly likely that we'll have already engaged within the habitat creation works within the southern section of the site, and so there will be replacement of habitat in any event. And in the land in between the two, operating as a local green space, also provides some high quality habitat. At the moment, I think with the absence of a grazier, the intention would be to manage it as a tall grassland habitat, and tall grassland habitats provide a very important foraging resource for greater horseshoe bats insofar as they supply macro moths, large moth species. They're associated with tall grasses, and those tall grasses and those large moths are another key foraging resource from horseshoe bats. They don't just eat dung beetles. Dung beetles are a very important resource, particularly around maternity roost sites like Brockley Combe, but that maternity foraging zone tends to be 1 to 2 kilometres from the edge of the roost and not much further. And we don't believe that the maternity zone, foraging zone for the SAC at Brockley Combe extends into our site. It's in Band B, not Band A.
Just to pick up that point about grazing, what is the relevance of the way in which that piece of space between the two sites is used to considering the effects of this development?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, going back to that question that was raised about grazing, what is the relevance of the way in which that, you've just mentioned it yourself as well, the way in which that land between the two sites is used in terms of assessing the specific effects of this development? Well,
grazing is important for horseshoe bats, as I say, particularly for juvenile bats as they emerge from the roost. The life cycles of aphidious dung beetles and horseshoe bats are intertwined. The aphidious dung beetles take to the wing at almost exactly the same time as greater and lesser horseshoe bat pups emerge on the wing from their roosts. And so their life cycles are linked, and therefore there is an abundance of high quality foraging resources for bats as they emerge from their roosts. And that's one of the reasons that we consider dung beetles to be a key foraging resource for bats, and hence we need grazing. But that's not the only thing that horseshoe bats eat, and the guidance is very clear that there are other ways in which you can deliver optimal habitat, one of those being creating valuable grasslands, valuable tall grasslands which are not overly managed, left to grow tall and long, and they provide an alternative foraging resource which can be equally important.
But just to clarify, accepting that that does generate an important food source, in terms of me looking at the specific effects of this scheme on this site, how concerned do I need to be about the way in which the space between is being used?
Like I say, it's the space in between the two developments is currently managed and is being managed to deliver what we consider optimal habitat. So if it can't be grazed, which would score a 6 in habitat points, we can deliver a taller grassland habitat, which would equally deliver 6 in habitat points. It's sort of, we use this empirical methodology that North Somerset have set out in order to make this evaluation. I don't consider at this site the absence of grazing to be critical to the bats' conservation locally. I think I accept and agree with Natural England that grazing would be preferable, but that doesn't have to be constant and always grazed. It can be occasionally grazed, or indeed periods of absence of grazing, provided the habitat on site is managed in an alternative, appropriate manner.
But just to be completely clear, is the way in which the land is being used between, is it a critical consideration in terms of considering the effects of this development?
No, I don't think it is. I think I would come back to the points we've raised around the importance of the site and the habitats on site for greater horseshoe bats. And we consider that whilst we do have some foraging, they're relatively low status. They don't provide, arable habitat doesn't provide a great abundance of foraging resources. We have recorded foraging bats on site. We think they're associated with the boundary features, the garden edges, the hedgerows and the like. And those are the features that we've sought to protect. The loss of arable land on site, I think, is neither here nor there as far as horseshoe bats are largely concerned.
Right, are you going to be involved in the conditions discussion later?
I know you've made an effort to get here this morning.
I do have an emergency dental surgery this afternoon.
Okay. Okay. Would you like to discuss that issue now, or a little bit later in the morning when you've had a chance to think about that? It sounds like this afternoon might be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of conditions that are relevant to the way in which the recommended measures will be implemented in terms of reserve matters. So the first one is the lighting strategy. I mean, you were emphasising the importance of those illuminated habitats in establishing the habitat for bats and biodiversity net gain. And in terms of the question is how fixed should we consider that to be? Is it intended as demonstration, or is it something that should be directly informing the way in which those reserve matters are cleared?
This is an outline application, and so there isn't at this stage a fixed design for the scheme. But as part of a HRA process, I need to assess something. And so I require the developers to provide me with a lighting design for a outline scheme, something that they are often not minded to do because the design isn't fixed. They wouldn't do this sort of engineering and design work at that sort of stage. But I need something concrete to assess. So we provide a lighting design. It doesn't mean that that has to be the lighting design that's subsequently implemented. We can amend the design in such a way, provided it adheres to the parameters that are set out within the Shadow HRA. It doesn't need to fix the nature of the development in any way.
So with that in mind, looking at condition 11, which talks about the lighting strategy, you would be suggesting that we reference the Shadow HRA within that condition.
Sorry, I don't have the...
Well, the point is at the moment it just says we need a lighting strategy. It doesn't mention the HRA, but what you were saying would suggest that it should.
I mean, it certainly could reference the work that's done in the Shadow HRA. I mean, it does say that the work needs to be submitted to and approved in writing by the local authority, and I believe, and that if approved by the local authority, they would presume, one would assume, ensure that it is consistent with the Shadow HRA which they have signed up to.
Well, you would certainly hope that, but it's useful for to flag it up sometimes.
I can't imagine that anybody would have any problems with a reference to the Shadow HRA.
The witness is sort of looking at me because I didn't take instructions, but you're absolutely right. It should refer. We produce that document. It's a substantial document, and we absolutely should refer to it in the condition so that everybody knows that's what we're signing up to.
There is a proposed lighting condition in the Shadow HRA, which, again, still doesn't actually make reference to the Shadow HRA, but does make reference to the importance of dark corridors and dark habitats.
We will redraft condition 11, so you don't have to, sir, and we will specifically make reference to, in accordance with the Shadow HRA and the date of it as well, so we're all clear about which one it is.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The condition that's been proposed is derived from the HRA, but it has got some added text in it, which doesn't entirely make sense. So some consistency with the HRA would also be useful.
Sure.
The condition that's in the HRA, and your observation here is that doesn't make sense as written, and I don't doubt you. I'm just
No, the condition in the suggested conditions is not the same as the condition in the. It's got some different text in it.
okay. Yeah. Well, we will obviously make sure that it is consistent with the condition that's been suggested, and make sure it makes reference to the HRA.
Have you also seen the latest draft of the Section 106 agreement?
No, I have not.
But we can send it to you now. So if somebody on the team could email that, please.
Also, the relevant plan for you to look at would be Plan 4, I believe.
So that's just going to come around.
Okay,
so you can have a look at Plan 4.
Yes.
Right, you may or may not know the answer to this question if you haven't actually been involved in producing that Section 106, but there is reference within it to, there's two things. There's the land that's used, let me just find the... So you've got something called the conservation area, conservation site. And that's distinct from the ecology zone. Now, I wanted to just clarify, I understand the ecology zone is the mitigation land for the site to the northeast. It's also in effect, what's otherwise termed the buffer zone around the site. It doesn't include the SUDS area.
No, it doesn't.
Although I understand that the Natural England are looking for that, in effect, to be managed in a similar sort of way. I mean, that's something that might merit clarification, particularly in terms of the terms that are given on Plan 4, which are not consistent. But that we can return to that later. But my specific question here is, what is the conservation area? What's its relevance?
Do you mean the ecological buffer area that's set up on this plan?
No, there's two different things. There's the ecology zone, which includes the buffer, includes the mitigation land to the site to the northeast. There's also something called the conservation area, which is defined as land used for the planting or nurturing of habitat-rich ecology.
This is Plan 4, sorry.
Well, no, Plan 4 is the one which shows the ecology zone.
Yes.
There's something else within the Section 106 called the conservation area. And what it amounts to land used for the planting or nurturing of habitat-rich ecology. And I just wondered if you knew what that was.
I must admit I've not seen that. And can you give me a plan reference and I can take a look at which one that is?
It's not shown on any plan. What it is I'll take you to the page number. Sorry, I've got a lot of documents. It's in definitions, yeah.
Sorry. So if you just, do you have that? It's a definitions in a schedule rather than definitions at the start. So it's an unusual location for further definitions. Yep. But just tell us when you're there. Page 31 of the PDF.
I've only got the summary of the statement of 106 here.
Okay, yeah, that's the wrong document. So we need the actual. Do you have your computer with you?
I do have a
computer. Okay, I'm just going to ask for that to be sent to you. That's the Section 106. And then once you get the email, just let me know and open up the PDF to page 31. Email arrived yet?
No.
Are you on the Wi-Fi?
I was just connecting, but I am now connected. Here we go.
If it helps you, sir, we have spotted this. We've got the solicitor coming this afternoon, but we had spotted a couple of issues with the plans, actually. So we've asked for that to be looked at, and you've obviously studied it and seen the same problems.
31, yes, I'm on page 31. Conservation area.
Well, my question really was, do you know what it is?
No.
And I mean, I was assuming it had something to do with biodiversity net gain, and that being so, I mean, it's a point that we can come back to later once it's been clarified what it means. But it's a later allowance for a payment to be made in lieu of actually providing that. I wondered, if there was some understanding of what it was, whether it would be acceptable for it not to be provided. I mean, coming back to your comments on off-site provision.
May I just offer some assistance? Yeah, so I see entirely what you're saying. I'm looking at the contributions in lieu of on-site provision, which is on page 38. And I can see that if the owner fails to provide the required square metres, so if it failed to provide it on-site, then it will be on the land, it says, of the conservation site on the land as part of the development the owner shall pay. So I rather imagine that it's within the red line, the conservation site, but I'm going to check that, and we've asked the solicitor for clarification as well, and that's if it fails to be done. But if in light of what the witness says, you know, it should be on site because we've said it's on site, then we don't need any of this.
Yeah, I mean, there is also reference to the conservation site underneath where it talks about no less than 2,875 square metres of woodland, and no woodland is proposed for this site, so I find that entirely confusing.
Yeah, that's why I've asked for the solicitor to come, because that doesn't make sense, does it? No?
Doesn't make sense at all.
I don't know whether this is something that the council have requested to be included. I'm not suggesting they have, but I wonder if this has come from another section 106 without a lot of care and attention being given to the detail of it. But we will obviously properly investigate that.
Okay, but the intention is definitely to provide what is needed on site, and we shouldn't really be considering in lieu provision.
No. Can you just answer that? Yeah.
No, we should be. Yeah, I mean, we need to deliver what is set out within the BNG, if nothing else. There's a legal requirement to adhere to the BNG, or at least provide habitats on site for that BNG.
Yeah, and the point that's being made is, in light of your evidence, we don't need contributions in lieu of provision, because we're telling the inspector we're going to provide on site, aren't we?
We're obliged to provide on site as a consequence of both the shadow HRA and the BNG, so yes.
Yeah, we'll cut that out. So.
And just one last point to check. You content that the Section 106 is a useful mechanism to secure that required bat habitat?
I mean, typically Section 106 is used for securing things beyond the red line boundary, and within the red line boundary, the Section 106 isn't essential because these things can be secured by conditions of the permission, but in my experience, Section 106s are quite an effective tool and mechanism by which to secure ecological measures, yes.
Okay, I've got no more questions. Was there anyone attending that wanted to ask a question? You have to remind me who you are first.
Of course. Lucy White, representing Backwell Parish Council. If I may ask a few questions of Mr. Clarkson. Firstly, could you just advise when the surveys were undertaken for the site that accompany this application?
Certainly. The BAT surveys were undertaken in from July 22 through to June 23.
Thank you. And I believe the assessment report was issued in March 24, is that right?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. I think we can take this as a given from what you've already said in your evidence in chief, that you would accept that the site is important habitat for the greater and lesser horseshoe bats.
Yes.
And the reason why this area, and I'm not necessarily just talking about this site, but the wider area, is particularly important for those horseshoe bats is the prevalence of cattle grazing in the area. In a very wide term, that these particular species of bats are quite rare within this country, and where they do have strongholds, it is generally where there is a lot of cattle farming going on in the areas, such as in the southwest, in Devon, and in this particular area.
Cattle grazing is undoubtedly important, but it's not the only sort of habitat that these bats rely upon. If it was all cattle grazed, that would present its own set of challenges. Bats need a diversity of different habitats.
Absolutely, yes. No, understood. And is that cattle grazed habitat important for all ages of bats, not just juvenile bats?
All ages of bats do take bats. The cattle grazing pasture is considered critical and key within the juvenile roost sustenance zone, but is still promoted as an important habitat throughout our entire consultation zone, which extends up to 10 kilometres from the roost at Brockley Combe.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. In terms of the approved HRA for Farley Fields East, that did include a commitment to continue cattle grazing of the land to maintain that important habitat, didn't it?
I don't have that document with me at the moment.
I have it to hand. Bear with me a second. It says, it has been confirmed that the existing pasture fields outside the application site, but within the ownership of the boundary, will continue to be grazed by cattle, which ensures the continued importance of these areas for foraging horseshoe bats. That's taken from page 17 of the HRA. When this shadow HRA was produced for this appeal, it refers to that commitment in the approved HRA, is it not?
I don't remember that commitment being...
Just so I'm clear about the document, thank you for drawing our attention to the document that you're reading from. Do you have copies? Do you have it?
It's only the approved HRA,
Yeah.
but also the one that we are looking at today, the shadow one, really.
It's in this one.
There is reference to it in the shadow appeal HRA.
Yeah.
Yes.
And could you just give us the paragraph number?
Yes, I've just lost it myself. If bear with me a second, I'll just try and...
10.2.2.
Again. Thank you, sir. That does ring a bell. Yes, that's exactly correct. So 10.2.2, which is on page 35, it says a commitment for continued cattle grazing within the two fields, separating the two applications which are within the same ownership as the two proposed developments, has been made to ensure optimum foraging habitat is retained within the Farley Fields area.
That is what it says, yes.
Okay. And when Natural England responded to the application on the 10th of September, they said that they recognised the importance of that cattle grazing. And if I may quote Alison Howell, she said, "Continued cattle grazing is fundamental in this area in order to continue to provide important prey species for horseshoe bats. The Dark Lane application confirms the importance of the area as foraging for horseshoe bats, and my view is that the commitment to graze should be reiterated in the submitted documents for this application, as it is the same applicant and so closely connected to the Farley Fields site." Now, whilst it refers in the shadow HRA to that commitment that has been made for Farley Fields East. It didn't go as far as to reiterate that commitment. Is there a reason why that wasn't the case?
I would suggest it's because it's not within the application. Making commitments to another application within this application would be problematic in planning terms, I would have thought.
Can I just assist, I hope, which is there are discussions about the land being transferred to the local community. There's a number of issues to be discussed around that, but if that happens, then Persimmon just are not in a position to make that commitment, because it would be up to the parish if that land was acquired by the parish council. So there's a difficulty in us making that commitment at this point in time. Obviously, you know, the land does transfer, which there's been certainly, well, all I would say is then the parish would have complete control to do that if they wanted to, but it's not something that Persimmon could control, because they wouldn't control the land anymore.
Sorry, you said when the land has transferred, obviously it's still in, just for clarity, it's in Persimmon's ownership as matters stand.
It would have to, wouldn't it? If I said it was going to transfer, then it isn't with the parish council now. It is Persimmon's land, but I know that, you know, it has been stated that because it's a local green space, it has no value to Persimmon because of that designation, and so transfer has been considered, yeah, but it hasn't transferred yet.
No.
The difficulty is if that's to go ahead and we make commitments about that land, then it'll have to stay in Persimmon's control, which I don't think is what the parish council want.
Just trying to help the inspector to understand what the position is. That commitment was made through the previous habitat regulations assessment, with the knowledge of that provision within the section 106 to offer the land to the parish council.
I know, and it's been recognised afterwards that if we transfer it, where does the responsibility lie for that, particularly if the parish council don't do it? They choose not to. People say, well, we don't want the cattle because we like walking our dogs there, and suddenly there's an obligation on Persimmon. I can't do anything about the previous housing scheme, but in terms of this scheme, it presents a difficulty for Persimmon because they've recognised that be effectively obligated to do something on land that they don't control, and they won't be able to do it. I'm not saying it's not legitimate, this line of questioning. All I'm doing is trying to explain why there's a difficulty.
Yeah, no, that's appreciated. Thank you. In those circumstances, that's helpful to understand. I suppose we can say then that there is deliberately no commitment within this HRA to the ongoing grazing of that land, despite Natural England's request for that to be reiterated. And I just, for one further question for Mr. Clarkson on that, then was Natural England aware that the grazing had ceased and that there would be no ongoing commitment to it when they agreed to this HRA?
I don't know whether they were aware or not. Frankly, I wasn't aware either.
Right. And because in the correspondence that we've been handed at the inquiry, I think some of you this morning, from Alison Howell, dated March the 12th, she refers to having a brief discussion with the ecologists for the applicant, Clarkson and Woods, to review that HRA. Was that you or was that one of your colleagues?
No, that was me.
Right. So in those discussions, did she raise anything about the ongoing commitment to grazing that she had previously sought?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Let's check if I had any further questions. Oh, yes. One, in your evidence in chief, you suggested that tall grass planting within the local green space could be a suitable alternative to cattle grazing. Is there any such provision within the HRA or the planning conditions or the 106 to provide that provision of planting?
Within the local green space?
Yes.
No, there's no commitment to make. There's no commitments within Shadow HRA to make to control any land beyond the control of the application.
Right. Okay. Thank you. In the discussion just a little earlier regarding the Section 106 and the conservation area, obviously you were referring to the plans. I don't think we've had sight of the plans. I'm just wondering on a point of admin whether it be possible to share those. We've got the draft Section 106 wording, but not the plans. Not necessarily directing that question to you, Mr. Clarkson. Is that okay? Thank you. Do we have anything?
Yes, that's fine. We can sort that.
Okay. Yes. And one final point in respect of that conservation area, if this may help the inquiry, we believe that reference to the conservation site may be a crossover from that Farley Fields East appeal, where, as you'll recall, sir, there's been mention this morning of the fact that that southern field of this application was also identified as mitigation for Farley Fields East, and we believe it was referred to as a conservation site or conservation area there, so it may be a hangover from that.
Well, it's something we'll return to this afternoon anyway.
Thank you. That's all our questions. Thank you very much.
The land ownership issue, I want us to be completely transparent about this. The position is that the land is to be offered. So I'm just checking my instructions, that's what I'm looking. Persimmon will offer the local green space to the parish in the next 3 months. So they will be offered that land. Nothing prevents either the council, if they take it, or Persimmon, if they retained it, from grazing the land. So we can make that commitment to do that. But of course, it being offered to the parish means that it's up to them, and we can't make them agree to that unless I suppose actually the parish could make it, that could be a condition of you having the land, couldn't it? You could actually yourselves provide a written undertaking that you will graze the land. That may be the answer. But we have no intention for it not to be grazed, but there's this ownership problem.
I just mention that that relates to an entirely different appeal, which is not before this inspector to make any changes to those.
It's the same land, so the local green space was referred to in the previous appeal, and obviously it's referred to in this appeal, and that land is what my instructions say is going to be offered to the parish in 3 months' time. So it is relevant. It's always been relevant to both appeals, and all appeals, in fact, the previous one where the road went across the middle of it. And yeah, it is relevant to this appeal.
I'm not denying it's relevant to the appeal, but it isn't within the gift of this inspector to change the terms of that unilateral undertaking.
But there's one before him. Okay, I'm going to give way now because you're asking your questions.
No, it's just a point of clarity. I suppose, are you saying that you would be making the same commitment then through this application, so it would dealt with differently? Just a question.
The commitment's already been made, so you don't need to do it again.
But on what basis would you introduce a commitment to the parish council to graze the land?
If they took ownership of it, then they would need to give the commitment that they were going to graze it.
Through what means?
By you writing down in writing, putting in writing that that's the intention of the parish council, but we can't make your clients enter into a legal agreement to do that in the context of this appeal.
No.
I think if I understand correctly, the point is whoever owns it, it could potentially be grazed.
I think the point also is whether there is a commitment to graze that land, and whether that, if there is not, should that be taken into account in assessing the HRA?
Well, can I just clarify with the, I did ask about this earlier. In terms of that paragraph within the cumulative impacts part of the shallow HRA, yeah, how fundamental is that to your overall conclusion?
How fundamental is the grazing to the overall conclusion of no significant effect?
I mean, you say if you were to have deleted that paragraph, or at least deleted the second sentence, would it have changed the outcome?
No, because this is an analysis of cumulative impacts. Whether the paragraph is there or not, the impact exists. And the commitment to grazing has already been made within the adjacent application, and therefore whether or not we state that that commitment has been made within the adjacent application or not, it still exists. The fact that it's not happening currently, as I understand it, is part of a transfer of anything to anyone else. Transferring with a sitting tenant would be far more problematic than it would be to transfer it without any sort of sitting tenant. And therefore you would typically transfer something, a title or ownership of something, without any sort of existing constraints upon it, and it for them be for the parish or the whoever subsequently owns it to decide how they should manage it. Now, there is a fairly constrained and clearly defined set of parameters as to how that management should take place, and if the parish council find that they are not able to commit to delivering that, then Persimmon Homes will likely retain the land and then will seek a grazier.
Just on a general point, would you consider that any kind of commitment to graze cattle is a slightly strange commitment?
Not in this part of Somerset. The need or objective to have cattle grazing is well documented and recognised as important for housing developments locally because of the importance of cattle grazing pasture. So I recognise that it's somewhat unusual in a national context, but locally around here, it's something that is quite frequently adopted or required of development. It was a particular point of Natural England's that they were keen to see it, and I think the term that Natural England used within their response to the previous shallow HRA was that the developer made best efforts to secure grazing. Recognising that it can be challenging to always maintain grazing on the site, and that's why I make the point that if grazing isn't currently happening, provided the habitat is being managed in an alternative equivalent manner, we are still delivering an important resource for bats.
So just, you make reference to the document that says best efforts. Can I just check what that document is? Put it this way: if you can find it and give it to me, that would be useful.
Thank you very much. So I don't have any questions. Can I just say your questions about the conservation area? we've spoken to the solicitor, and he says that that section was put in at the council's request. So it's not surprising that this witness was unaware of the woodland, 3,000 or whatever it is, square metres of woodland and so on. I think the council have sought to include that, and the solicitor obviously hasn't looked at the plans or thought about it, and so he can answer to that later. But his defence, I think, to certainly what is confusing a lot of us, is that it's something the council requested. To me, it looks like it's a cut and paste job from another proposal, because this witness doesn't talk about conservation areas. Got a heritage expert on that, but not this, and I agree, it's completely confusing.
Can I just add that I just quickly looked at the section 106 for the adjacent scheme, and there is no reference to a conservation area in that either, so it is definitely not something that has carried over from the adjacent scheme.
Yeah, and we'll clarify, as the witness has said, on-site provision is how we're going to do it here.
Okay then, that finishes that topic. It has taken a little bit longer than anticipated. I thought it probably would. The next three topics are closely interrelated, however. It'll be landscape, heritage and design. In order to let the next witness set up, it's probably a good time to take a 10-minute break. So we'll adjourn until 25 to 11. Right, time now to resume. Could I just start by asking whether you tracked down that document I asked about?
Yes, I've just done so. Just that very second.
What was that document?
It was a response to PINs by Natural England on the questions around the shadow HRA. I can provide it to you, sir.
It may also be useful for me, as it is referenced, to have the HRA in relation to the other development.
Copy the section 106. The transfer is dependent on first occupation of the other site. So the transfer of land is an obligation that we'd already entered into. And it'll be offered to the parish for no money. In fact, they get paid £30,000 for taking it. So the expectation is that they will take it. There are step-in rights associated with ensuring ongoing ecological use of the site. That's related to another site in Stroud, but it's in the same county. The solicitor who is coming, Mr. Charlton, is responsible for the section 106 here and in Stroud. So that's why I've asked him to come, perhaps more unusually, so that all of this can be explained and the transfer can be explained, because the step-in rights are only in the event that the parish didn't maintain the ecological status of the land.
Right then, if you could forward those 3 documents then to the case officer and just record those as inquiry documents. Thanks. Right, now we're going to hear from the appellant's landscape witness, Mr. Gary Holliday. If you'd like to start your evidence in chief, Mr. Young.
Thank you very much. Your name is Michael Gary Holliday, is that right?
That's right.
You have a BA Honours degree and a Master of Philosophy degree in Landscape Design from Newcastle University, is that right?
Yes.
You're a Fellow of the Landscape Institute and a Director of FPCR Environment and Design, is that right?
Yes.
You've been a Partner and Director in the practice for over 24 years and have some 36 years experience in landscape and development projects, is that right?
Yes.
You have a professional practice, you are a professional practice assessor and a member of the membership admission panel on behalf of the Landscape Institute, is that right?
Yes.
You're a registered assessor with Building with Nature, is that right?
Yes.
Which is an initiative developed by the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust to raise the standard of multifunctional green space, is that right?
Yes.
Good. You're part of the team that developed the residential scheme on the other site, effectively, the eastern
That's right.
site. Yep. And you prepared your evidence for this inquiry. Just a few points from me. Could we have a look at CD A20, which is the LVA? And I think you wanted to direct our attention to page 37, is that right?
That's right. The figure for the designations plan. I think we've got it.
Yep, okay. So if you just tell us what you want to highlight there.
Well, I just thought it was important to highlight the sort of. I think it's always important to look at the wider context for a site, the landscape in which the site is set more widely. And just, I think this is a useful plan that shows Backwell and the context that actually it's a pretty constrained settlement. There's a lot of environmental constraints around the edge of the settlement with the green belt, various designations. The land to the south of the settlement rises up more dramatically. I think that's the area of greater landscape quality. But if you can see the appeal site on that plan, and it's actually one of the few areas that's not designated, not covered by the various constraints. So I think that's a useful context before we sort of look in more detail.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the landscape character, can we look at figure 3, please? Page 36.
Yes, that's the page before on the PDF. That shows the different character areas. Obviously, like most of the country, there's landscape character assessments done. They break them down into different character areas. We're in the rolling valley farmland type, which is a bit of a transitional one between the flatter plains and the higher land to the south. So it does give us various characteristics in the assessment, but I think the appeal site is not particularly typical of the wider area, in that it is part of this enclosed area of land that's really got settlement all the way around it. So it doesn't necessarily share all the main characteristics of the wider character area. I think it's more important that we sort of look at the immediate context for this one and as to what's more relevant and sensitive.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the wider area talks about the presence of a variety of water bodies and a pastoral landscape, but here we are.
Arable field.
In the middle of a settlement.
Yes.
Certainly with housing all the way around.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So how does the land within the sort of enclosed area vary then, please?
Well, it does vary quite a bit, and I think if you've been on site, so you've probably seen this for yourself already, but the topography is quite important with the higher land to the south and the church, and it's been looked at over the years, by the council as much as anybody else. They've looked at the local green space designation from the background documents, which I think I refer to in my brief. Originally, the whole of that enclosed area was suggested as local green space, but on drilling into the detail, only part of it was designated, which we can see on the plans. And the reasons for that were the role that land played in the setting of the church, the recreational use with the public footpaths, and the fact that the high land to the south allows these panoramic views over the wider landscape. The current appeal site on the Farley Road development site that's now got consent were specifically excluded, and I think that's right because they don't fulfil the same roles that the rest of the land does. In sort of landscape sensitivity terms, they are much less sensitive, and I think in character terms, much more influenced by certainly this appeal site by the adjacent housing and the fact that it's lower lying land.
Good. Okay. And then next, please, can I ask you about the character of the site itself? I mean, it's an arable field.
It's basically a single arable field, housing on two sides of it. The boundary with the local green space is a rather fragmented hedgerow. There's nothing of any intrinsic landscape sensitivity on the site itself.
Rights of way through the site?
No.
Okay, so how does the scheme respond to the site and the context then?
It may be useful, to have a look at the illustrative master plan, as we describe in this, which I think is CDA 6.
Okay, and what do you want to say about that?
Well, I think the first point, sir, is that it's located on this lower lying land, so it does keep it out of the view lines from views from the wider green space. I think the development is shown on that plan and on the parameters plan is below the 38 metre contour. Just for reference, on the Farley Road scheme, I think that was limited that the development wouldn't go above the 46 metre contour, so we are notably lower than the consented one. And for reference, the local green space up towards the church is at sort of 55, 60 metres AOD, so it's considerably higher. So topography is important. And then in terms of the design, it's got these buffer edges, so it's set back from the existing housing, so there is an area of green space that will, protect the amenity of the neighbouring properties, but also to the local green space. And those boundary areas are typically 15 metres wide, which gives us space for a variety of treatments, certainly to restore the hedgerow that forms the boundary, get some bigger growing trees in there, but also then variety of habitats and spaces that people can access and use, but also would complement the adjacent area. And I think another helpful point is that with the access up from Dark Lane, actually there is the opportunity to provide better connectivity to the local green space, because there is the opportunity to go through this site and to link up with the public footpaths, which currently don't exist.
So I'm looking at the plans and I can see going past the open space and the LEMP, there's a route leading out to connect to the local green space.
Yes, that's right.
And obviously all that area is then accessible to everybody in the community.
Yes.
And the on-site areas are accessible to the community as well.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So the assessment of effects then, which is the whole process that you go through, what, in summary, is the position on
well,
those
that's all
effects?
set out in the LVA. We follow a process that's sort of well established by now. I noticed that the officers in the statement of case noted it to be thorough and broadly concur with their findings, was the quote that's in the statement of case.
Yeah, and that's in your proof at 7.2.
That's in my proof, yeah, 7.2. Obviously, the council don't think the landscape harms are sufficient to warrant refusal. I mean, in the way that as landscape architects we assess landscape and visual effects, any development on a greenfield site is seen as an adverse effect. But obviously it's quantifying that and explaining. I think for this scheme, the effects are really very localised. We've got this very contained site, certainly with the properties around the edges, and the mitigation and how it's been designed so that it fits into the wider context and relates to the green space really means that the effects are really quite minimised.
Good. Thank you. Those are all the questions I had. Mr. Holiday, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. In terms of, you'll probably be aware of the landscaping that's been proposed in relation to the buffer for bats.
Yes.
Taking that into account, to what extent would planting along the boundary be effective in providing screening? Taking that into account and topography.
I don't think it's going to. The intention has never been to screen. I mean, the existing settlement edge just backs onto the site. There's a variety of treatments, obviously hedges, fences, different properties have got different treatments. We're not trying to hide the fact that the houses are here, but to provide a softened edge. So I see it mainly as hedgerow with some additional tree planting, maybe groups. So it would soften visually the edge of the new development, but it's not going to surround it in a belt of woodland or anything like that. That was never the intention. And the planting will be largely native species, so it provides sort of both amenity value and conservation value.
Just to clarify, you took us to the illustrative master plan. In terms of that ecological buffer along the northeast edge, in practice, it's not the landscaping is unlikely to look like that. Is that correct? Based on the suggestion there's going to be a double hedgerow with a gap between. I know it's illustrative, but I just want to clarify.
I think it probably would look like that in terms of you've got a a belt of planting. If it's allowed to grow tall and thick, I mean, on the aerial photograph that's the base for that plan, if you look to the north of the local green space, that's effectively the existing hedgerow, and graphically, if you look, it's something pretty similar.
Which just expanding on that point, then. You're happy that in terms of the way this would be managed, you would in practice with a 10-metre buffer and a double hedgerow planting, you'd still get that space between?
Yes, there would be space. The hedgerow is not going to be 10 metres wide. You'd have probably a graded edge. You'd probably allow, longer grass, maybe some native shrubs and things towards the hedgerow, and then round the edges typically maintain some a bit more regularly, so it's got a neat edge for the residents rather than it all looking too wild. But that's fairly standard practice these days in terms of maximising net gain while still allowing people to use spaces.
Just one last question. In terms of a contribution has been sought to upgrade the footpath link. That's the existing right-of-way.
Yes.
Are you content that in landscape terms, upgrading of that path could be done sensitively?
I think it could be. I don't think it's the place. I mean, as I understand it, there's a 10,000 contribution in the 106. I don't think it's the place that you'd want a tarmac footway and lighting or anything like that. But certainly for £10,000, I don't think you're going to get that. If there was, I don't quite know what's envisaged, but sometimes it might be that areas of stone around gateways and access where they typically get trampled more, a bit like in field gateways, could be done so that it's more accessible when it's muddy, or even simple stone path, a bit like a farm track. And I think that might make the area a bit more accessible through different times of year without harming the character, as long as it's kept simple and in keeping.
Okay, are there any other questions from interested parties? Would you like to say anything else? Okay, we'll take another short 5-minute break just to let the witnesses swap around. Okay, so we're adjourned until 11:05. time to resume now, and next we'll hear from the appellant's heritage witness, Robert Skinner. If you'd like to start your examination in chief.
Thank you very much, sir. So, Mr. Skinner, if I can just introduce you to the inquiry. To do that, I open up your proof of evidence, and your name is Robert Skinner, is that right?
That is correct.
You're an associate with the Environmental Dimension Partnership, EDP, is that right?
That is correct.
And you have 16 years continuous experience in the heritage sector, is that right?
That is correct.
Your qualifications are a BA honours degree in Anthropology, Archaeology and Art History from the University of East Anglia, and an MA degree in Cultural Landscape Management from the University of Wales, awarded with distinction, is that right?
That's correct.
You're a member of the Chartered Institute of Archaeologists and work as a senior member of the heritage team at EDP, which as a whole is a registered archaeological organisation with the Chartered Institute of Archaeologists, yes?
Yes.
And you tell us about a portfolio of projects you've been involved in, assessing, evaluating and recording archaeological sites and monuments, and the investigation and assessment, including settings of both standing buildings and structures and historic designed landscapes across England and Wales. Is that right?
That is correct.
Good. Now, obviously, there's a lot of reference here to archaeology, but we're not looking in the ground. We're looking at the buildings predominantly. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So what is your experience of listed buildings and conservation areas?
I've been dealing with setting assessment work for listed building and conservation areas since I started working as a consultant some 14 years ago, and it's probably the most common aspect of my job essentially is to deal with heritage matters, and I have given evidence at public inquiry on heritage setting matters previously.
Okay, so we have a Grade 1 listed church. I know many churches are Grade 1, but we have a Grade 1 listed church at St Andrews, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And what is your assessment of the impact of this proposal on that Grade 1 listed building?
My conclusions were that the proposal would cause no harm to the significance of that listed building.
And why is that?
Well, with reference to Historic England's guidance setting of heritage assets, the sort of key considerations really are, an understanding that setting is not a heritage asset in its own right, and its importance lies in what it contributes to the significance of the heritage asset, and also that setting is defined as the surroundings in which heritage asset is experienced. And so the first task is really to establish what the significance of that church comprises. I would say that its significance is mainly contained within its physical fabric. It has architectural interest, it has historical interest. It's a 14th century church. It has artistic interest in its decorative stonework. But part of its significance also comes from its setting, but to a much lesser degree than that is contained within its physical fabric. The church is set within a churchyard with an adjoining cemetery, which is a later addition to the north, and I would argue that setting is, within that setting, the church is a central focus and is, a key element of, it is experienced as a very prominent building in that setting, and that's, a setting that contributes highly to its significance.
Just on that, I mean, I dare say many local people do enjoy the view as they walk up through the local green space and they see the church ahead of them, and when they're in the top field, the church is there, but we're not here talking about sort of picture postcards, are we? We're talking about the significance of the heritage assets and the setting of the... Yes?
No, I agree, yeah, and I think, without dwelling too much on the more immediate aspects of the church's setting, the church is obviously a tall building. It can be experienced, quite widely across the landscape from many different locations. The approaches, there are two historic approaches to the church across the local green space, from the northwest and from the northeast, which are represented by the public rights of way there. And that those approaches have a historical functional association with the church, and the church is a focal point in views along those routes. And so I would argue that within the wider landscape around the church, it is that experience of the church on that approach along those routes that is of relevance to its significance, and that experience and those the fields that those routes cross, the local green space, therefore represents an aspect of its setting that makes a moderate contribution to its significance.
Okay, so there's agreement with the council that there's no harm to the Backwell conservation area, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, in their statement.
And so the only matter is this effect on the significance of the church. You said the site isn't crossed by the historic approaches to the village in your evidence, that the approaches you've just been talking about, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
The site is not experienced from within the conservation area, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
The view to the conservation area from the site are only of the church tower and the upper part of Coombe Cottage, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
The view is not designated or historic or allows for a greater appreciation of other buildings?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
There's a lack of experience of the development from the conservation area, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
And the council agree with all of this in the statement of common ground?
They do,
Yeah,
yes, they
good.
agree with our assessment.
Obviously, the inspector knows no physical impact on the heritage asset. You've carried out your assessment in accordance with HE's guidance, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Good, okay. That deals with that. The change to the church's setting from the development then, please. This is your sort of step 3. What is it that you want to say about that?
Firstly, I feel that I've established that the site itself makes no intrinsic contribution to the significance of the church. There's no historic association between this field and the church, and so the development of part of the site would not, that change in land use wouldn't necessarily, wouldn't affect the church's significance. The housing proposed would be situated approximately 290 metres to the northwest of the church, with the southeastern part of the site proposed as green infrastructure. Now, I feel that that's very important, certainly in relation to the approaches to the church on the public rights of way that I mentioned a minute ago, because that would ensure that green space, hedgerows, trees would continue to sit within the foreground on that approach from the northwest along that public right of way. And whilst housing would be visible to the right, it would be situated behind the enhanced hedgerows that are proposed on the site boundary, and it would be seen in the context of existing modern housing in Backwell, which lies adjacent to the site. And so I think by the proposals have respected that important aspect of the church's setting, and will still allow an appreciation of the church with rural elements in the foreground on that approach. The appeal site doesn't contain any heritage assets that have any particular association with the church, and so there wouldn't be any loss of any heritage asset that relates to the church's significance.
Okay. There's this difference in position between the council and HE. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, so the council and Historic England's positions are quite closely aligned. they talk about, or that they argue that the site does make a positive contribution to the significance of the
Which party?
sorry, the Historic England
Yeah.
argue that principally, that the site does make a positive contribution to the church's significance on account of, there is a, I can quote it precisely if you just bear with me a second. Sorry, just bear with me a second. So they state that the land makes a modest contribution to the setting of the church, its open nature contributing to a sense of the church's rural isolation and its separation from the modern village. Now, I mean, I would contend that the church, whilst there are rural elements within its setting, is not situated within rural isolation. There are modern houses immediately adjacent to the church on Court Close, and a plan view such as sort of demonstrated in any of the plans really, from certainly on my proof plan, shows that Church Town, where the church is located, is directly connected to adjacent modern housing. There's modern housing, visible to the west and north of the site. And on that approach, on those public rights of way, you are aware of modern housing, certainly in the sort of immediate setting of the church. And so I would argue that that it is not set within in rural isolation. And in that respect, also the field at the site doesn't separate the church from modern development, because church and Church Town in which it's situated are situated immediately adjacent to modern development. That on Dark Lane and on Church Lane.
Okay, so the position is that you don't think the site forms part of the setting of the listed building.
No, that is not true. I think the site does form part of the setting of the listed building. The listed building can be experienced from within the site, and that is the definition of setting. But as I mentioned earlier, the importance is in what that setting contributes to the significance of the listed building. And church towers, by their very nature, are quite often visible across broad extents of the landscape. And in this case, it is only part of the tower that is visible from the site, rising above trees. You can't just define the ability to see a church tower as being, a de facto contribution to its significance. And there is a statement in the Historic England guidance that reflects this and discusses the visibility of church towers and spires in the landscape, such that it's acknowledged that they're often widely visible across the landscape on account of their height, but that development that does not directly impact on the significance of heritage assets visible within their wider setting, or where it does not allow, importantly, does not allow that significance to be appreciated, then they're unlikely to be affected by anything small scale that doesn't compete with their height. And I would argue that the following development, you're still going to be able to get a view to the church from within the site. There's a discussion of aligning roads so that a view is possible to the church, so you wouldn't stop getting a view, and it's that ability to see the church and the ability to appreciate it that is key to its significance, not the locations necessarily from where you actually get that appreciation, unless they have some intrinsic connection to the church and its significance.
And so your overall view is it is within the setting of the listed building, the church, but it does not cause harm to the significance of the church. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Well, a few questions. You mentioned the broad visibility of church towers. In this particular case, would you say that, relatively speaking, the narrow corridor along which you view this church tower is possibly the most important?
The corridor established by the public rights of way.
Well, not the public right of way, rather the corridor provided by open land.
It allows for an experience of the church, the openness of the land, certainly at the site, and across other fields within the area as well.
But can you direct me to these other views? Because obviously, you say there are these views. I'd like to just know where they are.
I can't direct you towards any specific photographs. To describe them, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can get a view to the views that basically take in the tower and the upper part of the church tower from open locations, mainly to the northeast of the church, where the openness allows for that kind of view.
Now, obviously, Historic England haven't attended and can't explain their comments. My understanding of their comments, however, was that the point they were trying to make was that the site is a adjoining space that is experienced on the approach along that footpath. So they were talking less about views from within the site than how development would be perceived approaching the church with that space currently provided by the site off to the right. So set within that context, I mean, what is the importance of the continued openness of the site? And I think it's worth saying as well, these comments are not atypical of comments provided by Historic England in relation to churches. And the point they're normally making is that the open land surrounding is a aspect of the historic setting.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the fields directly to the northwest of the church, the north of the church, that are crossed by public rights of way, are not part of the development site. And the proposals include open space and green infrastructure at the southeast end of the site that would further distance the proposed housing from the church and from its more immediate setting of fields, essentially.
But just to clarify, because you're saying that the site lies within the setting that it has no importance, more or less. But what is the relevance of the fact that it's been undeveloped for the entire history of the church, as far as we know?
Well, I think sort of early historic maps, or the earliest ones that we were able to look at, show the site as having been farmland, various divisions across it over that time. Much like farmland across, the wider area. Whilst that represents the, the historic use of the landscape in which the church is situated. It doesn't necessarily relate to the church itself, and it's other than just by being open land across which this church can be seen.
So just to clarify then, you see no concern at all in reducing the open setting of the church?
No, because the church would still be visible. It would still be a tall, historic building. It would still be possible to see it and appreciate that it indicates the the historic core of the settlement at Backwell, and the development isn't going to reduce its prominence as a building in any way, and there's still going to be nearly 300 metres of open land between it and the housing, and it's a sort of elevated position on top of the hill, and it's that aspect of its its physical character that contributes to its significance, the fact that it is visible and the fact that it can be perceived over a wider area. And the fact is that you will still be able to see it from within the site along roads. It will be a focal point, and it will still be possible to appreciate the fact that it is the most prominent historic building in the local area within Church Town.
Just picking up on that point, I know the party, the church, the council and the appellant agree there's no harm to the conservation area. It's not a point that Historic England agree with. I think the logic that they're putting forward is that the church, being the most important building in the conservation area, presumably makes the biggest contribution to its significance. So any harm to the significance of the church would logically result in harm to the conservation area. Do you think that that's a logical proposition?
I agree that Historic England do assess an equivalent level of harm, very low level of less than substantial harm to the conservation area as the church, as they do to the church. The council don't agree with that. I think Historic England don't really express precisely how that harm is achieved. They just reference their assessment of the harm to the church as being equivalent to the conservation area. I would say that the conservation area is a lot more than just one listed building. There are 10 listed buildings in the conservation area. It's got character, that is very much contained within its boundaries, and it's well enclosed by garden boundaries, buildings, and the experience of the conservation area is really achieved from the roads that travel through it, and include boundary treatments and the other buildings within the conservation area. And from within that core, you don't get any impression of our site, of the appeal site. And so I feel that yes, the church is an element of the conservation area that contributes to its special interest. But referring to my previous points, I don't feel that there should be harm to the church or to the conservation area in that regard.
But just to clarify, I think they're picking up on the framework point about setting. They're talking about setting of the conservation area rather than the way in which the conservation area is understood inside it. I think that's where they were coming from.
I agree, and that is what they're referring to. Yes.
Now, just one final point. And I note this in Historic England's response as well. The idea that the site is not visible at all from higher ground around the church. Is that an assessment that was undertaken during the summer?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So, if you can actually see it when the leaves aren't on the trees, what's the relevance of that?
I don't know whether you can see it when the leaves are off the trees. The church does have a fairly extensive cemetery between it and the to the northwest in the direction of the site, and there are also high stone walls in that location as well. So the church, you know, from its, you know, it kind of faces onto Church Lane. So certainly from that location, I don't think you'd be able to see the site even in the winter.
Okay, any questions from interested parties? If you just remind me who you are first.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Harland. Just a quick question to our witness. The topography, when you're standing at the church with your back to the church, what happens to the land on the churchyard? Is that level, or is it going up a hill, or? You know?
I think it slopes.
It slopes significantly. So the
yeah.
wall that is boundaried, which you mentioned is a high wall, I think by memory from Sunday, I think it's about 4 foot, and it's also sloping down. So I'm just checking your understanding. From my understanding, it doesn't interrupt the views to this site or rest of Farley Fields. Is that right?
No, I don't think that is right.
Well, I can just tell you that, you know, if you're standing in the churchyard, the walls, everything slopes down and you have a good view. And also, if you're standing in the properties, if you're standing at the churchyard, you can see the gardens and ends of the properties on Dark Lane on the west side of this site. And therefore, historically, when you've got arable land or you've got tractors in that field, from the St Andrews, you can actually see that site. Not all of it, not the conservation and ecology area, because that's treed, but beyond that, you can see it. I just wanted to check that you were aware of that.
You're talking about view from the churchyard, from the cemetery
Yes,
itself.
but of course the same works
not
the
from
other
actual
way.
Church itself.
So if you can see it from one side, then you can also see it from the other way up towards the church. So we do have views of the church from the site. I just thought I'd
Well,
share that
yeah,
with you.
I don't disagree. We definitely have views of.
So in terms of obscuring those views,
I think from the churchyard, and I refer to photographs that are included in the original Archaeology and Heritage Assessment. You can see over that wall down towards the site. You can see the trees on the boundary of the site, and you may well be able to see beyond that to the housing on Dark Lane. But that view is from the churchyard. It's not necessarily from the church. There's a good, it's quite substantial cemetery. That cemetery is extended.
yes, if I'm standing at the church, is what I'm saying to you, with the churchyard in front of me, looking down over the fields and over those trees, which aren't large trees, down to the proposed site, there is a viewpoint, as I said, not completely behind the ecological buffer, because that's, got your gradient there. So I'm actually asking you to kind of just check what the inspector has asked you about, potential harm to a conservation area.
I would still argue that the special interest of the conservation area and where it is concentrated in its listed buildings and the experience of it as an enclosed conservation area would not be, were you to stand at the edge of that conservation area and look down and see housing, you would not that would not constitute harm to special interest, that conservation area. I mean, there's already housing in the wider setting of the conservation area, modern housing.
But how many houses are you aware in Court Close, just to be clear?
Sorry?
How many houses were in Court Close, just to be clear?
How many precisely? Well, there's around about 10 or so.
Yeah, so we're not looking about, when you say modern houses, I think it's modern houses maybe 40 years ago, and there are a small number below 10. I mean, I don't have any further questions. I just wanted to give some clarification to the inspector who was asking questions about views and possible damage to the conservation area. My answers come purely from the experience of living there and visiting that site regularly. Thank you.
Anything else to say? Just before we continue, I think I don't think, looking through the core documents, I have the appeal decision related to the 2015 scheme. Now, obviously, I'm aware of it, but and I did request it previously, but it would be useful to have that.
Just on that, so it should be core document H4. So I sent it across to council this morning and said for some reason it's not appeared on the core documents website or on the list, but I referenced it in my evidence as CDH4. So I have asked for it to be added to the core documents, but I can get it sent straight across to you if that would be easier via the case officer.
Whichever is, so long as I've got it, if you are going to be going through it in the in your examination. Now we'll have another quick 5-minute break in order to change witnesses round. We'll be hearing design after that break. So until 11:45, we'll adjourn. Okay, time to resume now. And next we're going to hear the evidence of Gareth Howell on design. If you'd like to start your examination in chief.
Pointed out to me that the stables he was referring to are not 6 kilometres away, but they're 2.5 kilometres away. So just to correct that error. Okay, if I can use your name is Gareth Howell, is that right?
That's correct.
You're a director and discipline lead at the Environmental Dimension Partnership, is that right?
Correct.
26 years experience in the fields of architecture, master planning and urban design, is that right?
Yes.
You're a chartered member of the Royal Institute of British Architects, is that correct?
Correct.
And a member of the Architects Registration Board, is that correct?
Correct.
You hold a 2-1 Bachelor of Arts honours degree in architecture and a postgraduate diploma in architecture, is that correct?
Correct.
Good, thank you very much. I've just got a few questions, if I may. North Somerset Council's statement of case, which for your notes, sir, is at CDD2, draws conclusions regarding design matters under issue 8, the quality of design and layout, and doesn't raise any objection to the appeal proposal on design grounds. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There was a lot of evidence given at the last inquiry for the eastern site, and the inspector specifically considered the design and committing, in effect, or you sought to commit Persimmon to design principles at the outline stage. Why was that? And yeah, why was it done?
Yeah, well, we spent a lot of time analysing the site for the context analysis, which then resulted in producing a design commitment statement, which was a very extensive piece of work, which showed our commitment to design and placemaking principles that we'd deliver through the reserve matters application if it was approved.
Yeah, and what did that form part of the planning permission then, the commitment to the design statement?
Yes, and then subsequently with the RM application that went in subsequently, we produced a design commitment statement to make sure it tied through with the design compliance statement. So there's a continuity, a thread, if you will, of the design.
You produced at the reserve matters you said a design commitment statement. Did you mean that, or a design compliance statement at reserve matters to comply with the design commitment statement to the outline?
I was right. It was an actual design commitment statement to correspond with the compliance statement.
Okay. So, is it the same here? Is the intention to do the same here?
100%, yes.
Yeah. So, what is it? What is the document to which the inspector is being referred to show the commitment?
It would be our design and access statement that we produced. Effectively, it's the same as the design compliance statement that we produced at the appeal.
Okay. And the intention is, through condition, to be tied to that. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I suppose the question is sort of why. You know, you apply for outline planning permission. The council didn't issue an Article 5 direction under the procedure order, so they didn't require the detail to be provided. Why is it that Persimmon think it's appropriate to provide detail at the outline stage?
Well, I work with Persimmon in probably about 7 or 8 different regions, and I think in every region there is a commitment to placemaking. There's a commitment to employ consultants within the design team who are committed to achieving not only good design but great design. And it's so they can actually demonstrate to councils and the wider public that what they produce at outline stage can be delivered at reserve matter stage.
Yeah, because there have, let's be honest, there have been some concerns about Persimmon's commitment to design, and there have been some concerns about what's been produced, and Persimmon have taken a new chapter, as I understand it, in seeking to put design on a much better footing. Is that right?
That's 100% correct.
Yeah, okay, good, all right. It was also agreed in the committee report the design and access statement is supported by an illustrative master plan, and the design principles are in response to the design character. The statement of common ground confirms this provides a satisfactory framework. Now, obviously, there's no weight to be given to an illustrative master plan because it's illustrative, so it can't be tied to the planning permission. It's the other it's the design and access statement where the commitment lies. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Good. Okay, the statement of common grounds, so that's A25, CD A25, confirms there's agreement, I can lead on this, on design, and the submitted design and access statement has presented a scheme with high quality design principles. That's been agreed with the council, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, and then we've got specific agreements in terms of the core strategy and the development management policies. So there's a agreement on achieving what is required by policy CS12, achieving high quality design, but also CS14, distribution of housing, DM36, densities, etc. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, just talk us through the development, because it's a field, but there's a series of design principles that run through it. So just briefly, sort of where do we start with that, and what is the design concept here?
Yeah, I can direct the inspector to the DAS if that's okay. So that's called
Yes.
document A25, if possible, and it's probably worth, or certainly the illustrative master plan. But the DAS, actually, if I get to the page, has actually got an annotated master plan which picks up the main core design principles.
So we're going to go. So we're looking at the DAS A25. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, good.
Just find the relevant page. I'm scrolling through. See, it starts with the concept master plan through the principal plans, and then we get to pages 42, illustrated master plan, and the actual master plan itself, which is annotated up. So, very, very briefly, obviously start with the site entrance. You look at the site's natural assets and sort of what natural gain there is to be had. You look at fronts and backs, the existing context, the neighbouring homes and respecting those. You also look at the natural habitat, what are the opportunities there. And it has to be said, obviously, EDP, the multi-disciplinary nature of our practice, we very much try to lead on habitat creation and sort of landscape-led master planning as well. So it's looking at those sort of opportunities for people to engage with space, as well as providing sort of interesting internal sort of spaces and networks and movement routes. So obviously you've got the main entrance into the site, respecting the mature trees as you come into the site on the left-hand side. And we were keen to create a street hierarchy which put street trees and verges as the principal access, and then culminating in terminating a view with a little pocket park and semi-detached buildings which frame and terminate that vista. Then you divide the plot parcels up to actually engage with the boundary conditions and create ecological buffers around the site, rather than backing onto the existing homes and reducing that amount of access and movement around the site. And then you set up a different pattern of street hierarchies to respond to the different, more specific parts of the site. So we've created 4 very subtle sub-character areas as well, which are illustrated in the DAS, and those have different changes of material, form, the house types vary sort of slightly. So even with a small development like this, you still create a sort of richness in the materials and the grain, depending where the specific point in the site is. Another point to bear up the master plan, which Mr. Holliday picked up in his evidence, was that actually the built forms, we've actually restricted that back somewhere between the 36 to the 37 metre contour, which is much more low-lying ground compared to the Farley Field scheme, which is provided up to the 46th contour, which again, working with the local authority at the time, felt that was a sensible tide mark. But in this site, is actually much more low-lying and low-level, and its visual impact is greatly reduced because of that. So not only do we have the ecological zone in the southeast corner, but we have a significant landscape buffer for to also place the leap and play area, which then provides a perfect desired route to pick up with the local public right-of-way and movement up towards the church, as well as another public pedestrian route which goes in the north-east corner to pick up on the public right-of-way going south and connect back to the main Farley Road. So we're very much about this site actually turning, making sure we respect existing context. We're looking at views inside the site and outside the site. Just to pick up on Mr. Skinner's evidence, because of if we look at the development and its impact, it has been very much reduced in terms of its place and setting in the field of the church and the wider sort of conservation area, for very much the point about it being under the 38 metre contour development built form is somewhere between 36 and 37 metres. The height is all restricted to 2 stories as well. There's a predominance of hip roofs proposed, which reduce the scale and massing of the development. So it's very sort of demure in that sense. And also, even with the site area, I think it's about 6.26 hectares. The built form is somewhere just over 3 hectares. So the GI, or the amount of green space, is almost half of the development as well. So notwithstanding, you cross the field and you're into local green space as well. So you're connected very much into a wider landscape setting as well. I think the point to bear about the development, the Farley Road development, the setting of the church and access to local green space is really important, that the inspector picked up on, is the fact that the site is contained within those field boundaries. Part of the proposal is to increase the ecological buffers, so the planting around those field boundaries will be increased, increasing habitat creation, but also a little bit of screening or improving those hedgerow conditions. So I think it's in Mr. Holliday's evidence, LVA viewpoints 1, 3 and 5, and the inspector will see this with his site visit, the prominence of the church and the aspects of the church in no way will be detrimental with the proposed development, because it would be screened to different sides of the public rights of way and views in its relation to the existing built form and the field patterns.
It may be just worth having a look at the LVIA for that reason. Should we just turn that up and just have a look? You identified, I think, 3 views you'd like the inspector to have a look at.
Yeah. I'm just going to find it myself. Just need reminding which.
Are we looking for the number? Is that?
A few things open. There we are. Sorry. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Have you got the LVA?
Yeah, I've got it open. Sorry, I'm just zooming out. So. Yeah.
I think you said views 1, 3 and 5.
1, 3 and 5, yes. So, I mean, it was in relation to the questioning that my colleague Mr. Skinner was being asked. And if you look at the bottom of the public right-of-way experience review 1, as the first view, you will see the church as experienced on the left-hand side of that photograph, the field boundary in the foreground, and then you see some properties at the back of Dark Lane. With our development, as Ms. Skinner said, it's almost 300 metres away from the church, down the field, and then buffered all around 4 sides of the development, most notably away on the southern side with the ecological zone, the play area, and then informal open space. With proposed planting as well, that view will be very much filtered in terms of how you'd, and in my professional opinion, it wouldn't be to any detriment of the setting of the church from the church itself, or experience from public rights of way. If we go to view 3, which is, I believe, looking back from almost as if you've come out of the church and back down the top end of the public right of way, you'll see some cows in the foreground, but beyond that you'll see some trees and hedgerows. So the site dips away beyond that. So in terms of that experience, that wouldn't change. And then view 5, actually that's from the other public right of way, which is off to the north east, of the site. And you're looking back along the top section of the public right-of-way, what you do see, which I think is a visual distraction, is unfortunately the homes that caught close. I would call that architecture of its time, and that, to me, is quite a visual detractor in terms of the setting of the church, but our development wouldn't change that experience. So I think those three views, and obviously the inspector can draw his own conclusions from that, from the site visit, will be that this site is actually set down in a low-lying position, the site, and with the proposed landscape measures will be enhanced for the ecological and landscape improvements, but also for the setting of the development and its relationship to the built form.
Okay, good. And then finally, please, just the materials. A lot can be achieved, or they can fail to achieve, on the actual materials that are used. What's been the approach to materials here? Because, I mean, Backwell is, I think, not being unfair, is rather eclectic in its mix of styles, architectural styles and materials. So how have you approached that issue?
Yeah, we try to draw what I would say the best and the relevant, as well as this site having its own identity, but there is a predominance of the clay pan-tile roofs. So, and also in a different variety of sort of shapes and colours of those pan-tiles. So we're looking to employ the same thing, as we've done on the Reserve Matters approved scheme as well. The predominance of hip roofs in that, and then a combination of the rough cast render, some stone work on some key properties, sort of limited use of sort of brickwork as well. So with that kind of palette would work well, again, in this location. So following the same suit as we've done on the approved scheme across the way at Farley Road. And also, I think it's safe to say, getting through to the detail of canopies, barge board details, changing the colour of the window frames and door frames with sage green, dark grey and white. So it's actually got quite a fine degree of bespoke sort of detail, which is picked out some of the, I'd say, the better properties that experienced along Farley Road, Church Lane, rather than some of the development I would sort of say was of its time was a post-war area.
Good. Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, sir.
Well, just picking up on one thing, in relation to the scheme to the northeast, I see in the conditions related to that reference to the design commitment statement, which was presented at that appeal. Obviously, I don't know what that design commitment statement was, but you were saying it was similar to the design and access statement.
Yes, and at Mr. Young's request, as part of the appeal evidence, we produced a design commitment statement, which was to sort of go over and above the original outline submission. So that was presented to the inspector as part of my core proof of evidence at the time. Effectively, it was, I would say, sort of almost like a das addendum, but it is what it was. It was a commitment, or to achieving design quality that give the council and the inspector the confidence that could be delivered through as a condition for any sort of future approved reserve matters application. It was then sort of followed up with a design compliance statement, which is obviously this hasn't been submitted as core evidence, but it supported the reserve matters application, the subsequent application back in November 2023.
But that's not something you were required to produce, is that right?
No, it's me. It's me. On the reason it was done to address concerns inspectors might have had about a volume house builder with an outline scheme. And so I asked for it to be done. It's not a council policy or a council requirement at all.
So just in terms of the conditions that have been proposed in this case, where the design and access statement is listed, are you content that the thinking about that statement you produced in relation to the other appeal with that? Is it something you can condition in this case?
Yes, 100%. And in fact, I would expect that to be the case.
And just in terms, picking up your point in terms of materials, which is obviously a level of detail which might not be provided unless it was specifically requested. Should that form the subject of a condition?
We have no problem with that. We've suggested proposed materials in the design access statement, and obviously be subject to the detail as the reserved matters.
Any questions from interested parties?
Yes, thank you. I just had one question relating to levels. So I'd just be grateful if you could help in terms of what your expectations are in terms of changes to the existing ground levels to accommodate the development. I note, I'm not quite sure what page I'm at. I'm in part 2 of the DAS as it's presented on North Somerset. Page 55, where it's got the coloured up image of the 3D master plan there for the site, and that suggests that it's an incredibly flat site there. And then referring to, where are we here? Section 4.2 of the DAS, height and scale, that shows a red line site area with the site grade in and a blue area in the middle where the development is proposed. That talks about a maximum building height of up to 2 storeys, maximum 9 metres above future ground levels to ridgeline, with future ground levels noted to allow for a maximum of 1.5 metres above the existing ground levels to establish appropriate drainage, balance, cut and fill, and align street and buildings to consistent levels. Just be grateful if you could elaborate on your thoughts on how that's likely to materialise at the reserve matters stage, and if those standards, shall we say, those limitations can be adhered to.
Firstly, the case officer's report says those parameters or principles are acceptable. Through discussion, there was potential for very limited, for good placemaker reasons, but we've taken away any 2.5 stories, so we limited the development to 2-storey in height. It's common standard practice when producing parameters or principal plans to give an indicative height. So 9 metres is generally a pretty good convention for ridge height of a standard sort of domestic house. And you often give, well, certainly it's good practice to suggest that if unless you have a very flat site, you still have formation levels, you still need to build up engineering, cut and fill. So This is an outline application. It's still subject to detail and approve that detail. But to give an indication that sort of a maximum of 1.5 metres increase in height from existing ground level to a proposed level, it was just to give some comfort that it wouldn't be 2 or 3 metres up in the air. But also, subject to detail and cut and fill exercises, there may be instances where the development is at existing grade or potentially sort of lower. So, dare I say, devil's in the detail, but the fact is the case officer is deemed in Statement of Common Ground as well, it's acceptable, it's limited to 2-storey, but still allows for engineering levels to take any account of cut and fill exercise.
Thank you. I appreciate, again, it's not before this inspector, but just with reference to the previous phase of development at Farley Fields West, our experience has been that whilst the decision was made on the basis of a relatively low-lying development and limiting that impact through 2-storey development on neighbouring residents, the site at the moment is showing a build-up of heights of over 3 metres at the southern boundary. So we're just nervous of how that will be translated through this scheme, if it is indeed consented. Thank you.
Anything else to say?
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah, carry on.
Thank you. I was just looking at the DAS and the sort of the design layout in reference to, I think it's page 37, where you're showing where the inside area where the houses are going to be, and then you've got the ecology area in the south corner there. Just want to ask any questions about. You've got the play area just below the ecology area, and that came up yesterday in one of the residents' sort of speeches. What was the rationale with putting a play area next to ecology area, which is kind of rich in wildlife, the roe deer, nestle there in the thickets, you've got owls, you've got the badger set up there. Generally, children and conservation areas or ecology areas don't necessarily go, so I just wanted to hear your rationale for that, please.
Yeah. Firstly, the case officer agreed that that was the correct area to put play space. It serves another sort of function because it's on the desire line on the way to the public right-of-way, so every member of the public will get better use of that rather than sort of locking it into the centre of the residential part of the site. It also pulls development away from that boundary condition, so you're increasing the amount of green space where you should be, taking development away from, as we talked about, the conservation area. But also the appropriateness, there's a hedgerow and planting that's going to be acting as a stronger buffer edge to the ecology zone anyway. So 100% committed to that is exactly the right place where it should be.
So on that point then, because I think we're going to disagree on the location of the play area, but on that point about the buffer zone to protect the ecology area, bearing in mind you're going to plant a hedge, how are you going to ensure that there isn't intrusion into that ecology area for the maybe 10 years while that hedge is fleshing out?
I'm sure we can produce a detail to that effect as part of the Reserve Matters application detail. Okay,
well, I just think, for the point of the inspector, it's just helpful to elaborate really on some of the concerns that are mentioned yesterday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, then I think that we'll have lunch break now. After lunch break, we'll be looking at planning, then we'll be looking at conditions in section 106, and that should, after closings, we'll finish. Everyone happy with our lunch break?
Yes, please. Can I say I'm not going to be an hour in closing submissions. There's only really the highways issue that I've had to deal with. So I'll probably be about 20 minutes in truth in closing. And so I hope, and I'm sorry about yesterday, I hope we're back on track and to allow you to do your site visit this afternoon. Can I just check you're happy? We certainly are. Everybody's happy that it's unaccompanied and you'll be doing it unaccompanied. Is that the intention?
Yeah, I'm happy. I did the site visit itinerary the day before we opened. I'll run over it again. My main concern is to actually go into the site. And as I said, I did visit during the period when school children were walking down there, so I don't need to be there at that time today.
Clients, in terms of the access to get into the site, it's perfectly possible to get.
I think there's just an open field gate at the bottom corner.
Yeah, and that is just making sure it is open for you. Yeah.
Okay, then until 1:15, we'll adjourn.